After America is made on the lands of the Kure Wurrung, Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, we acknowledge that they and their ancestors have cared for the lands, rivers and sea, and all living creatures for thousands of generations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Hi, I'm Angus Blackman, and this is After America. The United States has always been a pretty violent place. It is a nation, like Australia, founded on violent dispossession, and then, in the case of America, violent revolution. And it has been marked by political violence ever since.
The US president has called it a dark moment for America after one of his most vocal supporters was assassinated during a speaking engagement at a university in Utah.
I am filled with grief and anger at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus in Utah.
The evildoers responsible for my husband's assassination have no idea what they have done.
The violence of the past week was not an aberration, but a shockingly common feature of American political life. The difference this time is the reaction of those in charge. In 1968, after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., Robert F. Kennedy called on Americans to come together.
What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another. Feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
Instead of cooling things down after the murder of right-wing influencer Charlie Kirk last week, Trump and the movement behind him are fanning the flames.
For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today. My administration will find each and every one of those who contributed to this atrocity and to other political violence, including the organizations that fund it and support it, as well as those who go after our judges, law enforcement officials, and everyone else who brings order to our country.
Joining me this week to talk about the history of political violence in the United States, Elon Musk and the British far right, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s recent appearance at the US Senate, is Australia Institute Director of International and Security Affairs, Dr. Emma Shortis. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Angus.
I guess the big news from last week, Emma, is that Australia woke up Thursday morning to see that Charlie Kirk, right-wing influencer and kind of darling of the MAGA movement, had been murdered. Could you just, for the, I guess, listeners who aren't so chronically online, explain who Charlie Kirk was and, I guess, what you made of this, like, really awful event?
Sure. So Charlie Kirk was, as you said, Angus, a darling, I guess, of the MAGA movement. He was a central figure in what during the election campaign was often described as the manosphere, like those right-wing podcast hosts who played a pretty key role in mobilizing voters for Donald Trump. So Kirk was widely credited by Trump himself as well with mobilizing particularly young white men to get out and vote for Trump. And so he built his career really in those online spaces, in the podcast universe, off the back of an organization called Turning Point that he established, which aimed to bring, as they described it, I suppose, bring conservative politics onto college campuses. So this traded off this idea that, you know, college campuses are a breeding ground for the woke elite, you know, that indoctrinates students into communism. And so he was famous really for railing against that, for generating lists, crowdsourced lists of professors that, you know, he would argue were, you know, almost kind of trading in treason against the United States. So he was a really aggressively right-wing figure who said some abhorrent things about people who didn't look like him. And in that way, of course, fit right into the Trump universe. And I think that helps explain the reaction from that universe to his death.
Yeah, so how is the, I guess, MAGA world reacting to his death?
Fairly predictably, I think. I was on Thursday morning, I was on ABC News Breakfast when Trump posted that Kirk had died. And, I said then that it was very clear that Trump and the people around him would weaponize this incident, this horrific incident of violence to their own ends, because that's what they always do. Trump is not the kind of leader who is going to try and cool things down. When we know all the evidence suggests that events like this can be seismic, they can be a catalyst for further violence. And what is required to avoid that is, for leaders to be leaders and call for calm and enact policies that help support that calm. And we know Trump's not going to do that. He loves violence. He welcomes it. He has welcomed it for his whole political career. And he and the people around him are already using it to that end. They're calling for retribution. In a video address from the Oval Office, he talked about going after the organisations that allowed this to happen or supported this action. Of course, there's no evidence of organisational involvement, but of course they will use this event, I think, to enact further oppression, to go after their enemies, and integrate it into that broader project, I think, of suppression.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll talk about him in a second, but I saw that Elon Musk seemed to be using this as an opportunity to, I guess, frame this as a problem of the left. Like he said something to the effect of the left being the party of violence. I mean, there's a lot wrong with that. The left isn't a party for starters, but a lot of the kind of online commentary from that MAGA movement seems to have been about how the left is violent and I guess attempting to whip up concern and fear in the community, whereas in the past you would have seen leaders stand up and try and call for calm. That the opposite is happening now, right?
Yeah, the exact opposite is happening. And I think a lot of people rightly are comparing this moment to 1968, to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in particular, and Bobby Kennedy Sr., the good Kennedys, response to those assassinations, which, was a beautiful and extraordinarily generous call for calm and for community and for unity that it's widely accepted did at least reduce the possibility of escalation in the aftermath of that shocking assassination. But of course, Trump is, again, totally unsurprisingly doing the opposite and using this line that they've used for a really long time, that the radical left, as Trump describes it, by which he means the Democratic Party, which is like not exactly radical or arguably even left. But he's trading on exactly that, saying that it's the left that's perpetrating this violence. He will cite the assassination attempt against him in Butler, Pennsylvania, when there's no real evidence that act was motivated by a particular politics or a particular ideology. Of course, it's a political act. An assassination of a political leader, an attempted assassination, is inherently political. But the evidence suggests that was potentially more about the seeking out of the glory of the individual gunman. That is also a thread through political violence in America, rather than something that was ideologically motivated. Like, the evidence suggests that this person was also trying to find out where President Biden might be. So there are suggestions that, it was just a choice about political leadership rather than an ideological choice.
Like not a left-wing, right-wing thing necessarily.
And of course, we don't know really anything about the person who assassinated Charlie Kirk. But we know they don't care about evidence. Of course, they don't care about that. And, I don't even know if it's worth continuing to point out the hypocrisy, but in that Oval Office video that Trump posted, he listed incidents of political violence perpetrated as he would argue by the left, and that this is a problem of the left, and he will, as I was saying, go after the organisations of the left. He will use this to do that. but doesn't even bother to mention other incidents of political violence perpetrated by the far right of the United States, including the murder of lawmakers in Minnesota fairly recently, or an attempted arson attack on the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania. So again, this is all by way of saying that, political violence is shockingly common in the United States and isn't, necessarily a project of the right or left. But what is clear is that Trump is intent on weaponizing that political violence. So I don't see a way in which this de-escalates.
No.
I want to begin by saying that Hillary and I are profoundly shocked and saddened by the tragedy today in Littleton, where two students opened fire on their classmates before apparently turning their guns on themselves.
Before I talk about the business at hand here, I want to say how saddened we all are to know that two students lost their lives in Southern California. Others have been injured in a disgraceful act of cowardice.
We've endured too many of these tragedies in the past few years. And each time I learn the news, I react not as a president, but as anybody else would, as a parent.
Yesterday, a school filled with innocent children and caring teachers became the scene of terrible violence.
Good evening, fellow Americans. I had hoped when I became president I would not have to do this again. Another massacre, Uvalde, Texas, an elementary school.
2 weeks ago in Minneapolis, a demonic killer shot 21 people and murdered the two precious children at a Catholic school. Can you believe that? Hard to believe. And time goes by and people say, oh, I sort of remembered, but I remembered, I'll always remember it. What a horrible thing.
I guess, too, the United States is not just a country where political violence is common. Gun violence of all kinds is incredibly common. This is a country where children get shot in schools regularly and nothing changes. I assume nothing will change.
No, no. I mean, it's, again, a lot of people pointed this out, but, on the day of Charlie Kirk's murder, there was another school shooting in the United States. Like, these happen all the time. They are a feature, not a bug, of American life. And, it's notable that there was a period in which, there was a school shooting and then there would be talk of gun reform and addressing gun violence. They don't even really bother with that anymore.
No.
Like the cycle has shortened, and we're not even really talking about gun reform. I mean, so, some Democrats and people on the left will talk about it, but no one's listening. No one with any power is listening.
Yeah. And I guess just back to that political violence point, late last week, friend of the show, Elon Musk, popped up again, this time in Britain. What's he been doing?
Yeah, so Musk gave a video address to a far-right protest in the UK that had kind of coalesced around that right-wing figure, Tommy Robinson. And Musk gave this, I mean, I don't know if it's too much to say it felt wild even for Musk, but it was more brazen, I suppose, than they have been in the past. Like they're clearly feeling emboldened by the power that they've got and the lack of pushback. But Musk effectively talked about almost like he skated around the idea of overthrowing the British government, that, the government has to go there and that 3 years or 4 years, like he doesn't even know what the electoral cycles are, is too much and something's got to change, and use some incredibly violent rhetoric, like talked about, violence is coming, whether you're ready or not, you've got to either fight back or die. Like this is pretty extreme rhetoric. And like for me, it just, it shows how fast the ground is shifting on the right and in the way that we deal with the right. Like it wasn't too long ago that I was being asked on national radio, like if we could we really say for sure that Musk was giving a Nazi salute at that post-election rally? Like, can we be sure that he knew what that meant? right? And now this guy's out there talking to the British far right about potentially overthrowing their government. Like this is how extreme these people are, and just how much they see, exactly as you were saying, this as an international project. Like this isn't confined to the domestic United States. The far right in this sense is networked, particularly across the Western world, including in Australia, and they see this as an interlinked global project. And that's why, again, as you know, I keep on saying, like, we can't pretend that what happens in the United States, that this kind of political violence is confined to the domestic United States, because they actively want to export it.
Humanitarian needs are quite big in Ukraine, have been big and remain quite big.
Now, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, it's 3.5 years, yeah. But we have to understand that the war in Ukraine started not in 2022. For Ukrainians, the war started in 2014.
If we have attacks on hospitals, energy infrastructure, Red Cross, the trend, global trend in wars, and Ukraine is not an exemption. It's compromising the rules that we have all accepted and the rules that have been established.
Moving to Europe now, I guess where Britain used to be. We hosted senior leaders from the Ukrainian Red Cross on the show last week, who I thought gave a really pretty moving and, I guess, first-hand account of what war actually means for people's lives in Ukraine. You were taking a little bit of leave, but I know listened back to it. What did you make of that conversation?
Yeah, I thought it was really moving, Angus. You know, in the security space, we speak so often of war in the abstract, you know, and particularly international security types will often talk about it almost as a game, you know, as a chess game of great power politics, as relations between strongmen like Putin and Trump, and not about what the consequences of all that actually are for regular people. And I thought that discussion highlighted that in such a moving way, and also, I think, really importantly, talked about the long-term consequences of that kind of conflict. You know, of course, in the midst of a war, like, we will talk immediately about ceasefires and peace, but very rarely talk about reconstruction or the long-term impacts of that conflict on the people of Ukraine in this case. And I thought that the way they spoke about the mental health impacts and the impacts on children was particularly moving, and a reminder of what we're dealing with and the spreading consequences, in particular, of the dismantling of the norms of international law that is, you know, happening as we speak.
Yeah. On that, Russian drones were shot down in Poland, a NATO country, last week, and Romania also reported Russian drones in its airspace. What's going on?
I think this is exactly what was predicted in the aftermath, in particular, of that Trump-Putin summit in Anchorage in Alaska, where, as our colleague at the Australia Institute, Alan Beam, has outlined several times, you know, Trump effectively said to Putin, what you can do is consolidate your territorial claims before we'll even talk about an end to conflict, before we'll talk about a ceasefire. So this is Putin, you know, testing the boundaries, seeing how much he can get away with in terms of these incursions into Polish and Romanian airspace, which is a pretty dramatic escalation. And, you know, as no doubt Putin expected, there has been almost no reaction from the United States, from the Trump administration. You know, Trump kind of shrugged and was like, oh, well, it's disappointing. But that's it. You know, Trump, as we've discussed many times, doesn't care about the dismantling of the norms and institutions of international law. He believes in a might is right world, and Putin fits into that perfectly.
I guess, given that the United States told the United Nations Security Council that it would defend, quote, every inch of NATO territory, but given all that we've just discussed, do we really believe that?
No, I made a face.
For those listening.
For those listening, that's right. No, I mean, why would anybody believe that? You know, those promises rang hollow, I think, even really before the Trump administration, and even more so now. You know, there's no indication that the United States would protect NATO territory. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they've indicated the exact opposite. JD Vance went to Munich not so long ago and told Europe they were effectively on their own, except for those far-right networks that they were encouraging in places like Germany. They've got no real interest they see no interest for them in the security of Europe and have a deep ideological alignment with Putin's Russia. And as far as I can tell, nothing has changed.
So as we're talking, the United Nations General Assembly is meeting. It's sort of a 3-week event. Australian officials will be in attendance. How would you hope to see, I guess, in response to all of this craziness happening on the global stage, how would you hope to see Australian leaders respond in New York over the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think, and we've talked about this many times before, I think there needs to be a concerted effort to stand up for and reinforce the established principles of international law, which the Trump administration is actively attacking. When you have 2 permanent members of the UN Security Council in the United States and Russia, and arguably others, including China, actively undermining the principles of international law, we've got ourselves in a very dangerous situation. And I think Australia at the UN has a great deal of respect and is listened to and can add significant weight to those conversations where Australia can unequivocally stand up for the principles of international law, whether that be in Ukraine, whether that be in Israel, or whether that be in what the United States is doing. I don't think we'll necessarily see that. Like, that would require a level of bravery that we are not accustomed to. But I think, pointing out what is happening in a clear way, devoid of that kind of diplomatic speak, could be very effective. And I think Australia could play a significant role in organising and rebuilding coalitions that do stand up for the principles of international law.
And we have seen some steps towards that, I think, too, right? Like, the Australian government has, unequally and probably not enough, but has been more vocal with regards to Israel's war on Gaza, with regards to some of the egregious acts of the Trump administration. So maybe there are some encouraging signs there.
I think there are. I think that the language, as you say, has been changing, particularly in Australia's commitment to recognise Palestinian statehood at this UNGA. I think that will generate some attention, and I think those are really important steps. But at the same time, it's hard not to be a little bit pessimistic when those statements are not necessarily backed up by actual real action, when at the same time Australia is committing another $12 billion to the AUKUS deal and our security alliance with the United States. That somewhat undermines our stated principles and our arguments about, shared values with the United States. And I think it also risks further undermining the respect that Australia does have in institutions like the UN.
I would like to address the recent shakeups at CDC. These changes were absolutely necessary adjustments to restore the agency to its role as the world's gold standard public health agency.
You're the Secretary of Health and Human Services. You don't have any idea how many Americans died from COVID?
I don't think anybody knows that because there was so much data chaos coming out of CDC, and there were so many perverse incentives. And these are modeled.
You don't know the answer of how many Americans died from COVID. This is the Secretary of Health and Human Services.
You canceled $500 million of research because the mRNA technology is about continuing the research to be ready for the next flu, influenza, the next pandemic, and you have to do the research.
I'm happy to have a detailed discussion with you about it. You're so wrong on your facts.
You're interrupting me, and sir, you're a charlatan.
But if you look at what's going on in the world with health, and look at this country also with regard to health, I like the fact that he's different.
For the last part of today's show, I wanted to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The Health and Human Services Secretary appeared in front of a Senate committee last week, and he was asked about his so-called MAGA Make America Healthy Again agenda. What's the latest there?
Yeah, so RFK did go in front of the Senate Finance Committee in what was being described in the media as a tense and combative session, where Kennedy rightly came under scrutiny for what he's doing as secretary and how he is effectively undermining, catastrophically, I think, undermining public health in the United States. And the hearing focused particularly in what is happening in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, because Kennedy summarily fired the director of the CDC, and that was followed by a bunch of resignations from the CDC in protest about what Kennedy is doing, and particularly his approach to vaccines. And that was, of course, something he promised he wouldn't do. That firing was something he promised he wouldn't do during his Senate confirmation hearings. So, of course, he was challenged on that, and was also, of course, challenged on his vaccine, quote unquote, vaccine skepticism, or his, eroding, I suppose, of both vaccine research and vaccine rollout, and what that will mean for public health in America. But, as combative and showy as that Senate hearing was, it doesn't appear that it will change much. This is the tried and true playbook of the Trump administration, is that you go in and break stuff, you fire people, they might sue you, they might try and go to the courts to get their jobs back, or to get the courts to say that this firing was illegal. But by then so much time has elapsed that it's almost too late and the damage has already been done.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that actually, because we've seen quite a lot of people from different sections of society come out and, I guess, speak out against RFK Jr. and what he's trying to do. We've seen doctors, public health experts, politicians. From the outside, it would seem like this is an area where maybe there is some chance for some effective resistance to the Trump administration, but it sounds like you're not so confident.
No, I'm not super confident. I think there is opposition, because what Kennedy is doing will have immediate impacts on public health in America. We're talking about the return of polio to the United States. These are the kinds of risks that Kennedy in the Department of Health is playing with. So there will, of course, be pushback. But as I was saying, this is a lot of what the Trump administration is doing, is that they, move fast and break things, to use that Silicon Valley phrase, which incidentally is where a lot of RFK Jr.'s support comes from. Stuff gets broken, and it's broken so quickly that actually putting it back together is incredibly difficult. As we've talked about on the show before, once you've stripped all that money from vaccine research or mRNA research, the damage is done. The expertise is lost. The architecture for research and cooperation is gone, and building it back up in the face of resistance from the people in charge is incredibly difficult. And once again, that's something that's happening domestically and internationally. When the Trump administration is withdrawing American support from international health organizations, withdrawing their experts, and also losing the expertise that they gain from those international organizations, you have this compounding effect that, again, is incredibly difficult to reverse. Not impossible, but you've got to have the political will and the power to do it.
Yeah. And if it does, even if it did get rebuilt, there's no guarantee that would happen in America, right? We've seen a flood of, I guess, experts and other people leave the country, and some of the money and obviously the brainpower, but some of the money, the investment go with it as well. People moving to places like Australia, to Canada, maybe elsewhere. So it really seems like shooting yourself in the foot, but I guess that's the point.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the harder, deeper ideological issues to grapple with, is that, it's deeply irrational. You can point to all of the evidence and say, quite literally say, this many people are going to die as a direct result of, the cutting of this X amount of funding for X program or whatever. The studies are all there, right? But this project, the project of RFK and Trump, is deeply irrational in that sense. You know, it is anti-science and anti-expertise. And that is based on a particular understanding of human society and how it should be arranged. And when it comes to RFK, that understanding is about health as an individual choice and about health as about individual goodness. So, you know, if you die as a result of his policies, that's because, and obviously I'm paraphrasing here, but this is the general kind of ideological bent. If you die as a result of these policies, that's because you were weak. Like that's because you made poor individual choices. So they have this kind of hierarchical view of health and society based on goodness and one that is often deeply connected to, if not just completely white supremacist, like this idea about effectively a master race that is healthier and deserving and ordained by God. Like this is where that comes from. So to put it extremely crudely, like if as a result of the reduction of this funding, you know, several million brown people die far away from the United States, then like that's too bad. That's on them. This is a might is right society based on individual strength and particularly hypermasculine strength. Like it's hard to get your head around, I think, because it's so brazenly cruel, but that's what it is. That is the motivation.
Yeah. And in preparation for this episode, we compiled a list of some of RFK Jr.'s greatest hits, and we might leave some of them in the show notes if you want to read a little more about some of the stuff he said. Well, that's a spectacularly grim note on which to end.
I'm sorry. Every time.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard you called Madam Doom before, and yeah, it feels about right.
Yeah, it fits.
Yeah. No, thanks very much for joining me, Emma.
Thanks, Angus.
Thanks so much to you too for joining us for this week's episode. If you want to dive more into some of these issues, including political violence in the United States, you can read Emma Shortis's essay, After America, Australia and the New World Order, is available for just $19.95 via the link in the show notes. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show today. You can reach out to us via our email address, that's podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. This episode was recorded on Monday the 15th of September, and After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation. We'll be back next week. I'm Angus Blackman. Thanks for listening.